In this fictional scenario, inspired by OutDaughtered, the story begins on what seemed like a completely normal evening for Adam Busby and Danielle Busby. Their home was filled with the usual rhythm of family life. Voices overlapping, footsteps echoing from room to room, and the constant motion that comes with raising a large family. Dinner had just ended, and the transition into the evening routine was underway. Some of the girls were finishing homework at the table while others were already winding down. Adam Busby stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes and keeping an eye on everything at once. Danielle Busby moved between rooms, making sure everyone stayed on track. Everything felt steady, predictable, safe. Then something shifted. A faint smell drifted through the air, sharp and unfamiliar. It didn't belong to anything in the kitchen, or anything recently used. Danielle Busby paused mid-step, her expression tightening as she tried to identify it. Adam Busby noticed it seconds later, turning slightly as his attention shifted away from what he was doing. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was subtle, easy to question. But then it grew stronger. One of the girls looked up towards the ceiling and pointed, her voice cutting through the normal noise of the house. Adam Busby followed her gaze and saw it. A thin layer of smoke beginning to form near the top of the hallway. That was the moment everything changed. Adam Busby moved immediately, his calm demeanor shifting into focused urgency. He stepped away from the kitchen and headed toward the source, scanning each area quickly. Danielle Busby, sensing the seriousness in his movement, didn't hesitate. She called all the children together, her tone firm but controlled. "Everyone, come here, right now." The girls responded to her voice, gathering quickly. Danielle Busby counted them instinctively, her eyes moving from one to another, making sure no one was missing. The smell was no longer faint, it was undeniable now. Smoke was spreading. Adam Busby reached the back area of the house and stopped. What he saw confirmed it. A fire had started. The flames were still contained to a small section, but they were growing, feeding on whatever was nearby. The flickering light reflected off the walls, creating a sense of urgency that left no room for hesitation. Adam Busby turned and moved back quickly. "We need to get out, now." His voice was steady but direct. Danielle Busby didn't question it. She immediately shifted into action, guiding the children toward the exit. Her focus stayed on keeping them calm, keeping them together. She repeated clear instructions, making sure no one panicked. The house, once full of warmth and routine, now felt tense and unfamiliar. Every second mattered. Adam Busby stayed close, making sure the path was clear and that everyone was moving quickly but safely. Danielle Busby led the group, keeping all eyes forward, not allowing fear to take over. They reached the door, and one by one they stepped outside. The cool air hit instantly, a sharp contrast to the smoke behind them. Danielle Busby gathered the children close again, counting carefully, her voice steady despite everything happening. Everyone was there. Adam Busby turned back toward the house, his expression serious as he looked at the growing situation inside. The fire was still active, and the danger hadn't passed. Standing outside together, the reality began to settle in. This was no longer just a normal night. Everything had changed. Outside the house, the shift from safety to uncertainty became more real with every passing second. Adam Busby stood a few steps away, his eyes fixed on the house, carefully watching how the situation was developing. Danielle Busby stayed close to the children, keeping them gathered together, her focus entirely on their safety and emotional state. At first, the girls were quiet. The sudden evacuation had confused them more than anything else. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension. That feeling alone was enough to make the situation harder. Then the questions started. One of the younger girls began asking if they could go back inside to get her favorite toy. Another realized she had left something important behind and started to panic. The sense of urgency that Adam Busby and Danielle Busby were trying to manage now began to ripple through the children in different ways. Danielle Busby immediately stepped in. She knelt down to their level, keeping her voice calm and steady, repeating the same message clearly. Nothing inside the house mattered more than their safety. She reassured them, even as the situation behind her continued to escalate. But emotional reactions weren't the only challenge. One of the girls began to cough. The smoke they had passed through while exiting the house was starting to affect her breathing. It wasn't severe, but it was enough to cause concern. Danielle Busby quickly pulled her closer, checking on her, making sure she could breathe comfortably. Adam Busby noticed from a distance and moved closer. His attention split between the house and his family, balancing both responsibilities at once. He checked on the child briefly, then looked around, realizing they needed to create more distance from the house. "Everyone, come this way," Adam Busby said, guiding them further away from the immediate area. As they moved, another issue surfaced. One of the girls had become overwhelmed. The combination of confusion, fear, and the unfamiliar situation caused her to freeze momentarily. She didn't want to move, her feet planted as tears began to form. Danielle Busby didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stayed close, gently encouraging her, keeping physical contact to reassure her. It worked. Slowly the child began to move again, but the situation remained fragile. Another girl began crying louder now, her voice breaking the temporary calm Danielle Busby had managed to create. The emotional responses were spreading, each child reacting differently, each requiring attention in that exact moment. Adam Busby stepped in again, helping maintain structure. He redirected their focus, giving them simple instructions to follow. Stay together, hold hands, keep moving. The goal was clear. Keep them occupied enough to prevent panic from taking over completely. Meanwhile, the fire inside the house was growing. Faint sounds could now be heard. Small cracks and pops coming from within. The smoke was becoming more visible from outside, drifting upward into the night sky. Danielle Busby noticed the children looking back. She gently turned them away. "Eyes here," she said softly, keeping their attention forward. The last thing she wanted was for them to see the situation worsening. Another problem emerged quickly. One of the girls mentioned feeling dizzy. Danielle Busby reacted immediately, lowering herself beside her, keeping her steady. Adam Busby moved closer again, his concern visible now. The combination of stress and smoke exposure, even if brief, was beginning to affect them. They needed help. And they needed it soon. Adam Busby took a step back, pulling out his phone, preparing to call for emergency assistance. His movements were quick but controlled. Danielle Busby stayed with the children, keeping them as calm as possible, even as the challenges continued to unfold one after another. The family remained together. But the situation was becoming more serious by the second. And the fire was still not under control. The situation outside the house was no longer just tense. It was critical. Adam Busby had already made the emergency call, his voice clear and direct as he explained the situation. Every detail mattered, and he made sure nothing was left out. As he ended the call, his attention snapped right back to his family. Danielle Busby remained with the children, holding everything together as best as she could. The emotional strain on the girls was becoming more visible now. What had started as confusion had turned into fear. One of the girls continued coughing, her breathing uneven. Danielle Busby stayed close, gently guiding her to take slower breaths, keeping her as calm as possible. Another child clung tightly to her, refusing to let go, her small hands gripping Danielle's arm as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. Adam Busby stepped in again, scanning each of the children carefully. He noticed something new. One of the girls had a minor burn on her hand. It likely happened during the quick exit, something unnoticed in the rush to get out. The injury wasn't severe, but it was enough to cause pain and distress. Adam Busby immediately crouched down, speaking calmly, asking her what happened, checking the area without causing further discomfort. Danielle Busby shifted her attention between multiple children at once. Another girl began to feel overwhelmed again, her breathing becoming fast and shallow. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the beginning of panic. Danielle Busby recognized it instantly. She guided her through it step by step, encouraging slow breathing, maintaining eye contact, keeping her grounded in the moment. But the challenges didn't stop there. One of the younger girls suddenly realized that her shoes had been left behind inside the house. Now standing outside on the ground, she became uncomfortable shifting her feet and starting to cry again. It was a small issue compared to everything else, but in that moment it felt just as important to her. Danielle Busby responded immediately, pulling her closer, reassuring her, keeping her from focusing on the discomfort. Adam Busby looked back at the house again. The fire had grown stronger. Flames were now more visible through the windows, and the smoke had thickened significantly. The sounds coming from inside were louder now. Sharp cracks, the unmistakable signs of things breaking down under heat. The urgency increased. Another child spoke up, saying she felt scared to even look around. The environment itself had become overwhelming, the flashing reflections of light, the smell of smoke still lingering in the air, the tension in every direction. Adam Busby stepped closer to the group. "We're staying together. Everyone's okay, just stay with us," he said, keeping his voice firm but reassuring. Danielle Busby nodded slightly, reinforcing that sense of stability the children needed. Then another issue surfaced. The girl who had felt dizzy earlier now seemed weaker. Danielle Busby quickly supported her, making sure she stayed upright. Adam Busby moved in again, his concern deepening. He checked her responsiveness, making sure she was still alert. Time felt slower, but everything was happening quickly. The sound of sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. It was the first sign that help was on the way. Danielle Busby heard it and immediately used it to reassure the children. "Help is coming. Just stay with me," she said softly. Some of the girls reacted to the sound with relief, while others were still too overwhelmed to process it fully. Adam Busby kept his focus steady, staying alert, watching both the road and the house at the same time. The family remained together, holding on through the chaos. But the situation was still unfolding. And they weren't through it yet. The sound of sirens grew louder with each passing second, cutting through the tension that had surrounded Adam Busby and Danielle Busby and their children. What had once felt distant now became immediate, a clear signal that help was finally arriving. Adam Busby stepped slightly forward, positioning himself where he could be easily seen. His focus remained sharp, ready to guide responders the moment they reached the scene. Danielle Busby stayed with the children, keeping them close, her presence acting as a steady anchor amid the uncertainty. As the emergency vehicles approached, flashing lights filled the area, reflecting off nearby surfaces and drawing the attention of the children. Some of them reacted with relief, while others became more overwhelmed by the sudden intensity of the moment. One of the girls covered her ears, sensitive to the loud sirens. Danielle Busby noticed immediately, gently pulling her closer, shielding her as much as possible while still keeping everyone together. Another child tightened her grip, refusing to let go, her fear still very real despite the arrival of help. The first responders moved quickly. Adam Busby met them halfway, speaking clearly and efficiently, explaining where the fire had started and confirming that everyone was out of the house. His voice remained controlled, focused on giving them exactly what they needed to act fast. Behind him, Danielle Busby continued managing the children. The girl with the minor burn on her hand was still uncomfortable. Danielle Busby carefully checked it again, keeping her calm while waiting for medical attention. The child who had been coughing earlier still showed signs of irritation from the smoke, her breathing not fully settled yet. Then another issue surfaced. One of the girls began to feel cold. In the rush to get outside, they hadn't brought anything with them. The night air now felt sharper, especially after the stress they had just gone through. Danielle Busby quickly gathered them closer, using proximity and reassurance to keep them as comfortable as possible. Adam Busby returned after speaking with responders. "They've got it under control," he said, his tone steady though his expression still showed concern. But even with that reassurance, the situation wasn't fully resolved. The children were still processing everything. One of them asked quietly if their home was going to be okay. The question hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Danielle Busby paused for a brief moment before responding, choosing her words carefully. "Right now, we're just focusing on staying safe," she said gently. It was the only answer she could give. Nearby, responders continued working, moving with urgency and precision. The fire was being actively handled, but its impact was already visible. Smoke continued to rise, and the glow of flames still flickered from within. Another child began to cry again, this time more quietly. The delayed emotional response was beginning to surface. What had been held in during the chaos was now coming out. Danielle Busby pulled her close, letting her cry, offering comfort without trying to rush the moment. Adam Busby stood beside them now. For the first time since it all began, he allowed himself a brief pause. His attention remained on his family, making sure each child was accounted for, each one supported in whatever way they needed. The girl who had felt dizzy earlier was now sitting down, supported by Danielle Busby. Her condition had stabilized, but she still needed rest. Another child leaned quietly against Adam Busby, no longer crying but still shaken. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to settle in. The house behind them was no longer just a place of comfort. It had become the center of a crisis they had barely escaped. But they were together. And at that moment, that was what mattered most. The fire was being fought. The danger was slowly being contained. But the impact of the night was far from over. The intensity of the moment slowly began to ease as the situation moved toward control. Adam Busby stood beside his family, his posture still alert, but no longer driven by the same urgency as before. Danielle Busby remained close to the children, her attention steady, making sure each one was still okay. The emergency responders continued their work, but the visible flames had diminished. The heavy smoke that once filled the air was beginning to thin. What had felt overwhelming just minutes ago was now shifting into something quieter, something more reflective. The children, however, were still processing everything. One of the girls spoke softly, asking if they would be able to go back inside. The question carried uncertainty, not just about the house, but about what came next. Danielle Busby gently brushed her hair back, keeping her voice calm. "We'll figure everything out together," she said. It wasn't a direct answer, but it was enough to provide comfort. Nearby, the girl with the minor burn on her hand was finally being looked at more closely. The pain had lessened, but the experience had clearly shaken her. Adam Busby stayed close, reassuring her with quiet words, making sure she didn't feel alone in that moment. Another child, who had struggled with coughing earlier, was now breathing more steadily. The fresh air and distance from the smoke had helped, but she still stayed close to Danielle Busby, not quite ready to move away. Then came a different kind of reaction. One of the girls, who had been quiet for most of the ordeal, suddenly began asking questions. What caused the fire, why it happened, if it could happen again? Her curiosity was mixed with fear, a need to understand what they had just experienced. Adam Busby answered carefully. "Right now, the most important thing is that everyone is safe," he said, keeping his explanations simple, focusing on reassurance rather than details. The family remained gathered together, closer than usual, their connection more visible after everything they had just gone through. Time passed. The situation continued to stabilize. the responders began to step back, their work nearing completion. The fire had been contained. What remained was the aftermath, the visible signs of damage, the lingering smell of smoke, and the emotional weight of the experience. Danielle Busby looked at each of the children again, one by one. She checked their faces, their expressions, their condition. Some were calmer now, leaning into her or standing quietly beside Adam Busby. Others still held on to the fear, their emotions not yet fully settled. Adam Busby placed a reassuring hand on one of the girls' shoulders. "We're all here. That's what matters," he said. And it was true. Despite the fear, the confusion, the challenges each of the children had faced, the coughing, the panic, the small injuries, the overwhelming emotions, they had all made it through together. That realization began to replace the fear. Slowly the tension gave way to relief. The night had not gone as expected. It had tested them in ways they hadn't been prepared for, but it had also shown something important, their ability to stay together, to act quickly, to support one another through uncertainty. Danielle Busby gently gathered the children closer once more. No one pulled away. Adam Busby stood beside them, no longer scanning for danger but simply present in the moment. The fire was out. The danger had passed. What remained was the understanding of how quickly things can change and how strong they could be when it mattered most. And as they stood there together, one thing was clear. They would face whatever came next as a family.